Adolfo Constanzo, they called him El Padrino, the Godfather. It's not exactly the first thing that springs to mind when you think of a Cuban-American lad from Miami. But then again, Constanzo wasn't your average bloke. He wasn't knocking back espressos and making someone an offer they couldn't refuse. No, this Godfather was stirring a different kind of pot, a gruesome brew of palo mayombe, drug trafficking and human sacrifice. You see, Constanzo wasn't just a gangster, he was a self-proclaimed sorcerer, a practitioner of dark magic, a man who believed that power, real power, could be conjured from blood and bone. Now, I've met my fair share of dodgy characters, from neo-Nazis to pornographers. But there's something uniquely unsettling about a man who thinks he can bend the laws of nature with a machete and a prayer to the devil. Constanzo's story is a bizarre cocktail of the ordinary and the outrageous, a cautionary tale of ambition, delusion, and the terrifying consequences of unchecked power. So buckle up, dear reader, as we delve into the heart of darkness and unravel the bizarre tale of El Padrino, the Narcosatanist who thought he could outsmart death itself. Adolfo de Jesus Constanzo was born in Miami in 1962. His early years were spent in a city that was a melting pot of cultures, a place where the old world met the new, and where traditions from across the globe mingled and merged. His mother Delia was a devout Catholic, a woman of prayer and piety. She was often seen at church, her fingers moving methodically over the rosary beads, her lips whispering prayers for protection and guidance. Her faith was unwavering, a beacon of light in a sometimes dark world. His stepfather, a police officer, instilled in him a respect for law and order. He taught young Adolfo the importance of discipline, of right and wrong, and the value of justice. These lessons were meant to guide him, to shape him into a man of integrity. So far so normal, right? Well, hold on to your hats, because here's where things take a turn. Beneath the surface of this seemingly ordinary life, a different story was unfolding, one that would lead Adolfo down a path few could have predicted. You see, alongside the rosary beads and the Ten Commandments, young Adolfo was exposed to another, more clandestine world, the world of Santeria. This was not just a passing curiosity, it was a profound influence that would shape his beliefs and actions in ways that were both mysterious and unsettling. Santeria, you see, is a blend of Catholicism and West African Yoruba traditions, a syncretic religion born from the horrors of the slave trade. It is a faith that combines the familiar rituals of Catholicism with the ancient practices of the Yoruba people, creating a unique spiritual tapestry. It's a world of spirits and deities, of offerings and sacrifices, where the line between the living and the dead is blurry at best. In this world, the spirits of ancestors are ever present, guiding and influencing the lives of the living. Rituals are performed to honor these spirits, to seek their favor and to gain their protection. For some, it's a source of comfort, a way to connect with their ancestors, but for others, it can be a path to darker, more dangerous practices. The power that comes from these rituals can be intoxicating, leading some down a path of obsession and darkness. And young Adolfo, well, he seemed drawn to the shadows. There was something about the mystery, the power, and the danger that captivated him. He was not content with the ordinary. He sought something more, something that lay beyond the veil of the everyday world. It's said that he was a precocious child, intelligent but troubled, fascinated by the occult and obsessed with death. He devoured books on magic and mysticism, his young mind absorbing the arcane knowledge like a sponge. His intelligence was undeniable, but it was coupled with a darkness that was hard to ignore. He dabbled in witchcraft, performed rituals, and even claimed to have psychic powers. These were not just idle pastimes, they were serious pursuits that consumed much of his time and energy. He believed in the power of these practices, and he was determined to master them. By the time he was a teenager, he was already reading tarot cards, casting spells, and developing a reputation as a bit of a dark horse. His peers were both fascinated and frightened by him, drawn to his charisma but wary of his strange and unsettling interests. Little did anyone know that this teenage fascination would blossom into something far more sinister, a deadly obsession that would leave a trail of blood from the streets of Miami to the deserts of Mexico. His journey was just beginning, and it would take him to places darker than anyone could have imagined. In the early 1980s, Constanzo, now a young man with a taste for the finer things in life and a growing ambition, moved to Mexico City. He was drawn to the city's vibrant energy and the promise of endless opportunities. The bustling metropolis, with its mix of old-world charm and modern chaos, seemed like the perfect place for someone with his aspirations. He was determined to make a name for himself, no matter the cost. Mexico, with its vibrant culture and lax law enforcement, proved to be fertile ground for Constanzo's burgeoning criminal enterprise. The city's underbelly was a playground for those willing to bend the rules, and Constanzo was more than willing. He quickly learned the ins and outs of the local criminal scene, making connections and establishing himself as a force to be reckoned with. He started small, dabbling in petty theft and fraud, but his ambition soon outgrew such mundane pursuits. He realized that to achieve the power and wealth he craved, he needed to think bigger. Petty crimes were just the beginning, a stepping stone to something far more sinister and lucrative. He craved wealth, power, the kind of influence that couldn't be bought with stolen credit cards. He wanted to live a life of luxury, surrounded by opulence and respect. The allure of fast money and the high life was too strong to resist, and he was willing to do whatever it took to get there. And so he turned to a more lucrative trade: drugs. The drug trade offered the kind of money and power that petty theft could never provide. Constanzo quickly immersed himself in this dangerous world, learning the trade and making powerful allies. He was a quick study, and it wasn't long before he was running his own operations. Constanzo's charisma and his supposed supernatural abilities proved to be powerful recruiting tools. He had a magnetic personality that drew people to him, and his claims of supernatural powers only added to his allure. He used these talents to build a loyal following, convincing his followers that he could offer them protection and power beyond their wildest dreams. He attracted a motley crew of followers, from disaffected youths to wealthy socialites, all drawn to his promises of power, protection, and untold riches. His followers came from all walks of life, united by their desire for something more, something that Constanzo promised to provide. They were willing to follow him into the darkest corners of the criminal underworld. Among them was Sara Aldrete, a beautiful and intelligent young woman from a wealthy family. She was captivated by Constanzo's charisma and his promises of power. Despite her privileged background, she was drawn to the excitement and danger of Constanzo's world. Known as La Madrina, the godmother, she became Constanzo's lover and right-hand woman, her devotion to him absolute. She was not just a follower, she was a partner in his criminal enterprise, helping him to expand their operations and solidify their power. Together, they established a cult-like following, a bizarre blend of Santeria, Palo Mayombe, a darker, more aggressive form of Afro-Caribbean religion, and good old-fashioned greed. Their rituals were a mix of religious fervor and criminal intent, designed to instill fear and loyalty in their followers. They called themselves the Narcosatanists, a name that sent chills down the spines of even the most hardened lawmen. Their reputation for violence and their bizarre rituals made them a force to be feared. Law enforcement struggled to keep up with their activities, often finding themselves outmatched and outwitted. They believed that, through ritual sacrifice, through the spilling of blood and the offering of human hearts, they could appease their dark gods and gain unimaginable power. These gruesome rituals were not just for show, they were a core part of their belief system, a way to ensure their continued success and protection. And for a while at least, it seemed like their gruesome rituals were working. Their power and influence grew, and they seemed untouchable. But as with all things built on such dark foundations, it was only a matter of time before their empire began to crumble. Now, I'm not one for superstition, but the things Constanzo and his followers got up to would make even the most hardened skeptic think twice. Their actions were not just the stuff of nightmares, they were a chilling reality that unfolded in the shadows, far from the prying eyes of the law and society. They performed their rituals at Rancho Santa Elena, a remote ranch outside Matamoros, just across the border from Brownsville, Texas. This isolated location provided the perfect cover for their dark deeds, a place where they could operate with impunity, away from the watchful eyes of the authorities. The ranch became their temple, their killing ground, a place where the air itself seemed thick with evil. It was as if the very land had absorbed the malevolence of their actions, becoming a silent witness to the horrors that unfolded there. The rituals were a grotesque parody of religious ceremonies. They twisted sacred rites into something unrecognizable, something dark and perverse. The symbols and chants, once meant to invoke divine protection, were now used to summon something far more sinister. Chanting, animal sacrifice, the drinking of blood, all designed to invoke the favor of their dark deities. But it wasn't enough. The more they indulged in these macabre practices, the more they craved. It was a never-ending cycle of blood and darkness, each ritual more depraved than the last. Costanzo craved more power, more protection for his drug operation, and his rituals grew increasingly depraved. He believed that through these dark ceremonies, he could shield himself from harm and ensure the success of his illicit empire. But with each act of brutality, he was losing a piece of his humanity. They began raiding graveyards, digging up corpses to use in their ceremonies. The dead were no longer allowed to rest in peace. They were dragged from their graves to serve a new, horrifying purpose. It was as if the boundaries between the living and the dead had been completely erased. They believed that by consuming the hearts and brains of the dead, they could absorb their power. This cannibalistic belief was rooted in ancient superstitions, twisted to fit their own dark agenda. It was a gruesome practice that defied all notions of decency and morality. The line between faith and madness had been well and truly crossed. What started as a quest for power had devolved into sheer insanity. The followers, once merely misguided, were now fully entrenched in a world of delusion and horror. Costanzo, fueled by a potent cocktail of cocaine, ambition, and delusion, had become a monster, a man who believed he was both God and devil, answerable to no one. His grip on reality was slipping, and his actions became increasingly erratic and violent. And as his power grew, so too did his paranoia and his brutality. He saw enemies everywhere, and his response was always the same: more blood, more sacrifice. The once sporadic acts of violence became a daily occurrence, each one more brutal than the last. The sacrifices, once sporadic, became more frequent, the victims snatched from the streets and disappearing without a trace. Innocent lives were cut short, their fates sealed by the twisted desires of a madman. The community lived in fear, never knowing who would be next. But the darkness, like a stain, was about to spread beyond the confines of the ranch, and the world would soon learn the true cost of El Padrino's unholy ambition. The media would catch wind of the atrocities, and the full extent of the horror would be laid bare for all to see. The reckoning was coming, and it would be swift and unforgiving.